You can keep it on. You can keep it on. Assalamualaikum. We're going to give everyone a couple minutes to join, and then we will start with the learning circle, inshallah. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we'll have people join in as they can. So, assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today for our learning circle. Let us know in the chat where everyone's joining from. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So our topic for today is on Muslim maternal health, Muslim maternal mental health, particularly with a focus on mothers in Gaza. And our presenter for today is Dr. Sondos Al Sad, and she is a clinical associate professor at the University of California in San Francisco. And of course, this learning circle is being organized by the organization that I work at, Maristan. And we hope that inshallah you'll benefit from it. And when we do these healing circles and learning circles, we like to create an environment that, will make not only our speakers feel safe, but also make our participants feel safe and secure to share their thoughts and ask questions. And so there are certain guidelines that we put out for everyone to follow. First of all, this is a safe space, and to ensure that safe space, once the presentation portion of the session is over, we will stop recording for, the microphone portion where we'll allow participants to ask questions to our speaker. And of course, be mindful of what you're saying and what kind of questions you're asking and how they're phrased to ensure that, there aren't any triggering scenarios put out there that might make another participant feel uncomfortable. If you feel comfortable to do so, feel free to share your name. If you choose not to, that's totally fine as well. You guys know the topic for today, so please keep your comments relevant. Keep your comments short so we can provide time for as many participants to speak and ask questions as possible. And of course, no disrespect will be tolerated in this environment. Okay, so a little bit about our speaker today. Dr. Sondos Al Sad is an associate clinical professor at the University of California, San Francisco's Family and Community Medicine and Women's Health Primary Care Center. She specializes in menopause and perimenopause care, neuroendocrine women's mental health care. She is a facilitator of CAIRSFBA's Muslim Healthcare Professionals Advocacy Network, known as MPAN California chapter. She's the chair of Abstract Review Committee at the Menopause Society, a founder of the health education platform DrEmpath, focused on Muslim and Arab Americans, a teacher assistant at Maqasid Institute, and a volunteer research at the Family and Youth Institute and the Initiative on Islam and Medicine. Today, Dr. Al Sad will be helping to paint a picture on what is happening in Palestine now and what the experience of Palestinian mothers may be. She'll be speaking on mental health support and the long-term health consequences of the experiences of Palestinian mothers and how we see, the consequences of the current genocide manifest and mechanisms for coping. So objectives for today are to address the conditions and learn about the mental health and consequences faced by women in Palestine under occupation. to also learn mechanisms for coping with the emotional labor women are facing and how to support them during hardships. And of course, at the end, we'll have a community call to action on how we can support Palestinian mothers during this time. And with that, I will pass it on to our amazing speaker, Dr. Sondos Al Sad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you, Tasmir, for the kind introduction, and thanks to Maristan for this event. And I genuinely mean it. The platforms are really busy, and a lot of times people may question how can we add, and hopefully that I can address this kind of probably potential cynicism amongst us as a community. What can one voice add? What can organizations do? We are and we can do a lot, inshallah, and I hope that we both can have this session not only to learn, also to heal together collectively as a community, inshallah. It's so humbling actually to be at this platform, and inshallah ta'ala, I hope that you guys can feel comfortable participating throughout the presentation as well. This is a heavy topic, and I do believe that our community has the tough shoulders to carry it around, but I always remind myself and everybody else, the fact that we are carrying it gracefully does not mean it's not heavy. And the fact that it's heavy does not necessarily mean that we're not going to be able to push through. So I would like for each and every one of us to ground ourselves, inshallah, and we mean it when we say Bismillah. So as I say Bismillah to start, you also say that amongst you and yourselves. And if you have a prayer to catch, depending on your time zone, feel free to take a few moments to pray. We're kind of warming up here, so feel free to take some few minutes to make sure that you catch your prayers on time, inshallah ta'ala. As Tasmir said, we're going to address the Palestinian maternal mental health, right? And before I delve into the cause, I always like to make sure that those who are listening to me we both are on the same page. So I always like to start with conceptual staging. So if we can move on to the next slide. Bismillah. So I would like to break that title of the learning circle. Who is a Muslim when we talk about Muslims? What maternal means to us, especially to women's health, since this is actually my niche and my specialty. And how do we define mental? What does that mean actually? And why are we talking about that now in the May month, or like around this time? There's a reason the platforms are full of mental health for maternity and maternal period of time. And why the Holy Land specifically? And it is very important for us to remember that we're not doing things just because it's a trend, because we really need to refocus as an ummah of qist and an ummah of wasat of why we are doing things. We're not necessarily joining just because this is the popularity. So let's try to break that down, inshallah ta'ala. Who is a Muslim? I would like to define that as whoever identifies as a Muslim is a Muslim for me. But what does that add to the title? If you can just go to the next slide. So a Muslim is the one who is defined by Quran and Sunnah. Anyone who says, I'm a Muslim, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, and they acknowledge the 5 pillars of Islam, that is our Muslim fellow that we're talking about. They, as a Muslim, as somebody who looks at topics, at trials, at tests, at blessings, we look at it and we read it by the name of our Creator. He has our manual. We understand the world and we read it, and we have our insight and vision through the reading of the Creator, or what the Creator set us for as a goal and as a purpose of life. What is maternity? It's actually that phase that is pretty much protected even in research nowadays. It's not easy when to study, especially for biological concerns. There's a lot of ethical gatekeepers and checkpoints before we can study actually the maternal phase. And that is why no matter how much you find in literature, in research, whether it's at the Islamic, enlightened period, or now like the global period of science, we don't really have much information about maternity. So we are already starting at an undercredited, underfunded, underestimated important period of the womanhood life. So whenever we say maternity, it's anything that is relating, belonging, characteristic of a mother. When I say that we're talking about the Muslim maternal health, I want to remind myself and you guys that we are talking about also the concept of ummah. Mother is in the Arabic language, and it also contained in the word ummah, the nation, the group, the collectivity, the community, the population. So when we talk about maternal health, we're actually talking about public health from my standpoint. All the health, the global health, really lies on how we treat our womanhood, especially at the time that they are reproducing and bringing the next generation. It also means, from an Islamic standpoint, the kinship, rahim, the womb or the uterus. The concept of, or the word or the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ar-Rahman, is connected to Ar-Rahim, or the uterus or womb, and Ar-Rahim mu'allaqatun bi'arsh Ar-Rahman. So the womb or the uterus is actually something that is attached to the all-merciful, most merciful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the name of Him. So when we talk about maternal health, we're actually talking about the root of mercy in the humankind, in the human story. So we're talking about kinship, we're talking about mercy, we're talking about empathy, we're talking about nation, we're talking about community. So maternal health should not be underscored the way it is, underestimated or undercredited the way it is nowadays. So that's another dimension of the topic that I would like also, guys, to add to your perspective when we are trying to go through the collective healing moment that we're going through in this circle. Why are we talking about it in May? Because in 2014, a few congresswomen technically, announced the week of May 5th to 11th as the Maternal Mental Health Awareness Week. And since the 2014, many states across the Congress has actually adopted that month as that. How does that matter for you guys as learners? Wherever you fall in the community, as a mom, as a teacher, as a doctor, wherever you fall, or hat or hijab you wear, it's very important to understand that nationally, when we have an awareness month, it's actually a good opportunity for civic engagement, civil involvement, and mobilizing civil rights to address that concept specifically. So awareness is a very important piece of the triad of civil movements or civil rights or civil engagement. Understanding why the Congress has chose that, because they want people to study it, to learn about it, to advocate for it. So that's where the timing comes from. Next, please. And then a very important piece of the mental health. This is actually the fortune that I have had because I am technically an immigrant clinical provider. I got my studies, medical education, in multiple areas of the globe. I do remember this very well from a wonderful scholar, may Allah reward him, Dr. Abdurrahman Dakar al-Hashimi. He has really a great content, and I'm happy to share that with you. The way we look at the concept nafs, psychological or psyche, we think of it as an equation of three important ingredients. And every nafs that has breath in it, that Allah created, whether it's a plant, an animal, or a human, has these three ingredients. All the creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that have a life, they are called nafs, and they have these three ingredients: the body, the soul, and the time. All of us actually share these tools together. Regardless if you have mental capacity, if you are old, if you're young, these three ingredients are common amongst all creations of Allah that are actually breathing. The mental health, which is actually the core of all these ingredients. So when separating mental health and physical health, you just understand that current global, or what we like to call secular science, is actually the separation between mental and physical health does not make sense at all. Mental health, or الصحة العقلية, where al-aql is manat al-taklif, like the concept of aql is actually where the concept of accountability comes from, the intellectual concept comes from. The mental health is making sound sense of all of these ingredients. The mental wellness is not really the absence of illness, it's actually making the best out of these ingredients. And what I'm hoping that this circle actually will give us, probably some component of healing by understanding. What we do when we learn and we get aware, actually, it's something called cognitive processing therapy. And that comes very handy when communities are going through collective trauma. So it's very important to understand or remind ourselves of what these concepts mean. So when we talk about mental health, think about these ingredients. It really encompasses our physical health. It encompasses our dynamic relationships with the times that we live in. And that hence comes what we call trends, popular topics, or actually topics that are relevant to who we are. So we identified as Muslims. We do know and understand that womanhood actually is the core of public health or population health. And that's why al-Rahim mu'allaqa bi'arsh ar-Rahman, that the womb or the concept of a woman's maternal health is actually connected to the kinship, connected to the ummah, the nation, connected to the most merciful. And these concepts actually brings inclusive and more global dimension to understand how we address the concept of mental health in general. And because mental health specialists are ones to count access to, it's very important for each and every one of us to have the toolkit necessary to understand how can we support mental wellness in communities. So it's not just exclusive to any authoritative figure or someone with a specific degree. The next, if you may. Jazakallah khairan. So now I move from the concepts, ideas to the events, where we live in this time, in the current times, just to kind of have really like an objective understanding of where we fall in the civilization history. There has been actually a lot of civilizations before the West, global North and global West, global South. There has been civilizations that are more advanced than us. That concept is very arrogant that we have actually gotten to the epitome or the tip of the iceberg, and what we have done now with artificial intelligence and great advancement are unprecedented. That in itself is actually heedless, the least to say. So nowadays, the national mom's health in the United States, we have the highest mortality, meaning if I am a mom pregnant in the United States, I'm more likely to die compared to other developed countries. And the likelihood of me passing away because of maternal related complications are way higher than most developed countries. So the difference between the worst and the US is at least 9% per 100 life birth, 100,000 live births. And these are statistics from 2020, which is like 4 years ago. Unfortunately, because of the colonialism, because of the current state that we're in, which is not unprecedented, most of the stories in the Quran or even in any book of faith of revelation, it's mentioned how these the wealth conquering, the 1% conquering wealth, and the classism being disappearing, and no middle class, and power seekers versus people servants. All of these like polarization of radicalization of communities have actually witnessed the poor utilization of these constructs, right? أنا خير منه, I'm better than him. That's the first word of the shaitan to Adam alayhi salam. The same thing, أنا خير منه, that arrogance, and which is بطر الحق وغمط الناس, which is like denying the rights of others and oppressing or suppressing or putting barriers or checkpoints to justice and equity to be implemented. Unfortunately, the race construct is used even upon Muslims. So even though Islam is a faith and Muslims are a religious group, they're racialized, meaning their affinity to Islam or to the Muslim community has been racialized. So they're treated as the race less favorable. Same thing as the Black women. So unfortunately, if I'm a Black woman in the national system, I am way more likely to die because I'm pregnant than a white woman. Like 55%, 55 per 100,000 birth compared to 19 per 100,000 life births in white women. Maternal mental health, it's getting worse, really much worse. The current state of the United States, despite the wealth that we live in, the United States have failed to secure the adequate support of maternal mental health. National grade is D+. Like for us, immigrant parents, that's really, really bad. Everybody should be A, doctor or engineer. So the same thing for mental health. It's D+ in most nations, except for 4 states. California is one of them. It's C in California. 29 states have actually received either Ds or Fs, meaning they don't even meet the bare minimum of mental health support during maternal period of time or reproductive phase for women. Maternal mental illness. 1 in 5 women pregnant in the United States actually suffering of maternal mental illness during maternity periods, whether it's pregnancy or around childbirth. 50% of those are not diagnosed by providers, and 75%. So 1 in 4 women do not, only 1 in 4 actually do get the necessary treatment or access to that. And this is a 2024 mental health report. In the same bill that has actually announced May to be the Maternal Mental Health Awareness Week for the United States, the reason behind the bills that were processed and approved by Congressman, actually Kim Young is one of the California state women who have actually got that bill moving since 2014, mentions that besides that 1 in 5 mothers actually do not necessarily get treatment, the proper treatment, the cost of that illness is $14 billion a year. Does this number ring a bell? And move forward. What we do in the healthcare industry, my dear and beloved community, is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked us to do. We are actually the successors, the vicegerent that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen us to bring a Rabbaniya, meaning the Lord good characteristics into the world. Mercy, empathy, appreciating life, equity, al-qist, moderation, al-wasat. All of these are very important to maintain life. And that is why al-Maqasid, or one of the top overarching purposes of our living or in our lifestyle as believers, as people of faith, is to preserve life. وَمَنْ أَحْيَاهَا فَكَأَنَّمَا أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا. That whoever saves one life as if he had saved all humanity. And also that who had sacrificed a life or murdered a life without a reason to implement justice, as if they have killed humanity all. And when we look at maternal mental health or maternity mortality or severe maternal morbidity, we are inadequately supporting our own women. And if the cost of that is $14 billion per year, how do we spend that money on warfare? To the next slide, please. This story that we're living nowadays, it's very important to remember that it's a recurrent theme. People who know me, they understand very well that if we don't repeat, we repeat what we don't repair. If we don't really go back and figure out why this is happening, we wouldn't be able to rejuvenate or renew the humanity narrative. Every one of us have hopefully read some sort of a book that speaks of how human rising happened, how resurrection and renaissance happened, and how many lives were lost for the sake of liberation. And that is why actually all religious movements or messengers or prophets are actually bringing up a revolutionary concept every time. When people love the status quo and have managed to submit to power seekers, and there's like a wealth plus fear mongering, there is a recurrent theme of what we see nowadays in the Holy Land, in Gaza Strip or in Palestine or even Congo or Sudan. I'm not trying to undermine the current cause, but I want ourselves to understand that constantly reacting to a status quo is not the way that we're meant to live. That is not the lifestyle that a Muslim who looks at things by the name of their creator should actually let things be or let things settle where they are. This is called a deep medicine model. It's very deep, and I know it's a lot. All but I want you guys to pay attention to, and I don't know if you can see my my browser or the mouse, but the genocide circle here, it starts with the concept of colonialism, istimar versus imar. Instead of us trying to build an equitable and moderate communities and populations for all of us to live together under the roof of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who actually gave us the choice of believing in him or not. But those who believe in their creator are meant to liberate those who do not, who want to actually to follow desires or want to submit to power seekers, who want to hold strings or be the stakeholders of ownership, or like Fir'aun, I'm your Lord, what I tell you is the truth, and so on and so forth. The colonialism, istimar, is like, this land is mine, and I know what's best for it. I know what's best for the people. And then I create a man-made constitution. The colonialism leads to harnessing or grabbing of resources under the concept of capitalism, which promotes consumerism, promotes a lot of isms like sexism, a race above race. And that's why it's very important when the Prophet ﷺ started the concept of preaching. It wasn't really the individual commitment to the Islamic pillars. It was actually the commitment to the 10 commandments, or the values of establishing equity, qist, in this universe. And that's why the one command in Surah Al-Rahman was وَأَقِيمُوا الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ وَلَا تُخْسِرُوا الْمِيزَانَ. So it's very important for us to remember that really the core of i'mar, the core of our establishment in the land, is actually equity. So if you are one who believes in your creator, you know that your purpose is establishing equity in your own personal individual life, in your own family, in your own work, in your own community, and up as you step up the ladder, as you know, the previous people at the time of strength of Islamic Ummah, whether they are that soon as the Ottoman or Umar ibn Abdul Aziz or Khulafa before that. Then there is, of course, the race above race, لا فضل لعربي على أعجمي, which is very important. And I deal with racism as a public health crisis on a daily basis. So for Muslims, for Palestinians, for Sudanese, for Congo, for people of the Congo, to actually experience the supremacy of one race above the other, whether it's the white now, or like the Mughal at some point, or like the Tatar before that, or even like the Ottoman Empire towards the end, how Turk people like favored nationalism over the brotherhood or the brethrenhood. All of these are actually recurrent images of dropping the ball on equity and wanting to grab more resources under capitalism. Part of the supremacy is genocide, because the only way that you will be able to justify as a human being killing of another human being is to see them less than you, which is the da'wah of peace, which is the preaching of the shaitan at the first time, or the evil. The genocide, unfortunately, is one big reason why trauma happens. And I see the impact of trauma of all refugees and immigrants and asylum seekers when they see me in the clinic. The trauma leads to inflammatory processes that actually lead to so many physical ailments that we cannot justify it only through biological forces. So understanding the impact of genocide on those who are witnessing it directly firsthand, or those who are watching it like us as a collective trauma, is a serious business, and it's very much established in this kind of model and other models. So I highly recommend you guys grab that book, which is Deep Medicine for Dr. Rupa Maria. It's a great read, and if you are not a great reader of books, it's also an audio book version, and I highly recommend you do that. Move on to the next slide, please. Now, because we do understand that the genocide happening in Palestine or Sudan or Congo or Uyghur or like any place in the world, it's very important to understand some objectives, because there are people who are standing in the middle. I don't know if it's actually really bad. I don't know. So a teach-in is actually part of our cognitive processing therapy. As people attending this circle, I highly encourage you to have some awareness, objective awareness of what's going on in the Holy Land. There are at least 160 pregnant ladies delivering every day now in Gaza. That's like a medium-sized hospital, maternity hospital here in the United States. 160 beds are needed. Think about anesthesia, think about electricity, think about water, think about 8 months they are pregnant into this war before they have delivered their baby. How much this trauma can impact them and impact their babies in womb and in utero. A person who's 16 years old now in Gaza, which could be a mother in a few years, have actually survived 5 assaults on Gaza in their lifetime. And unfortunately, I hate to say that if you are watching me from the West, the global North, like United States, Canada, or any European country, it's our tax money funding that. So there is a moral obligation as a citizen of these countries to speak up and to understand these numbers and to bring them up in every sphere that you can, and to speak up on behalf of those who are oppressed, whether they're relevant to your affinity group or not. Because remember, our purpose is to establish equity in this world. More than 275 healthcare workers arrested, tortured, probably in their detention, they're lost. And we're talking about 17 to 20 years of medical schooling for each individual of those. So it's like, if I was to calculate this in years, it's over a century loss of education that could have served women in maternal health. And that's more of a representation that is being wiped out. And it's a specific type of genocide called scholasticide. We're killing scholars in medicine that could actually serve women during that period of time. Over 31 hospitals destroyed, over 126 ambulances targeted. The life expectancy is a decade less of Palestinians who are living few kilometers from the occupied territories, which is known to this world as to this side of the world as Israel occupational force. And the infant mortality. So if I was to deliver a baby now in Gaza, they are 11 times more likely to die than someone born a few kilometers from them in the occupied territory. These numbers actually matter for us to understand, especially if you guys are a good consumer or you guys are understanding of, like numbers, since this is where we have become actually now looking at things. And thank you. For mental health, and I don't know if anybody has actually got the opportunity to hear of any of the work that has happened recently of the Muslim mental health conferences, but alhamdulillah, there are a lot of platforms that have spoken to the dire situation now when it comes to mental health. The continuous trauma. Continuous trauma means like I am living it on a daily basis, and the only way that would work for me to continue living it's something called ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy. I accept that the reality is tough, it's atrocious, it's hard to deal with, and I commit to doing something every day that keeps me alive. And that's why Gazans or Palestinians or people who are living these things, even Uyghur, by the way, in China, people who are living this on a daily basis, they didn't have time to do the processing matter or the processing therapy. They live minute by minute, day by day. They couldn't necessarily survive otherwise. And some of them have actually gotten emotionally numb through the continuous trauma. So this is significant, right? When we talk about more than 1.6 million displaced, we're talking about like people who are living physical ailment. And as we know, a healthy mind can only reside in a healthy body. The more we challenge them physically, the harder their meditation would be able to keep it up. And that is why knowing some of their toolkits would actually help us also survive and serve. I'm not saying thrive through this trauma. We have to survive and serve through this kind of collective and continuous trauma. PTSD, it's really a lot of those elderly who have been through multiple nakbas in that area. They actually do seem to live the PTSD, meaning they can bear the emotional labor, speak their pain, because it's very hard. If you look at how when people kind of record some of these kids or these moms or these elderly people, it's very hard for them to give you expressions that align with the trauma. That's why a lot of times people do mix the traumatic experience that has been standardized in mainstream media as like, oh, like a lot of movement and a lot of facial expressions and tears and shaking to the ground. No, Palestinians have actually been through this. And the way they show their PTSD is very blunt. So a lot of times actually people mistake that PTSD signs to like they got along with the situation. No, they did not. But this is like a very emotionally advanced response to the trauma that I have been through. Postpartum depression and anxiety, which is less morbidity than PTSD, for two reasons. One, because we have actually established ways to treat, and there are medications that are well solidified, which we don't have access to in that area, that could actually support these women, but they're not necessarily available for all. So you have to actually rate and stratify their morbidity and mortality, who's like at the severe level of depression and anxiety, and whom you can actually save. Pretty much like how you do amputation of a leg or how you treat like a puncture to the lungs, you actually need to stratify the mental illness and treat accordingly. Interestingly, a new diagnosis has come up, which is the low self-esteem. Those people are you know, like they may have not faced the same degree or intensity of trauma or like injury, but they feel the low self-esteem, especially during the maternal health. Like they would come to the clinic and like, I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to take a shower, or like, I'm sorry, I didn't know that my water broke. I zoned out. They are capable of bearing their emotional labor. They're capable of expressing themselves. They don't really score high on the standardized testing like PHQ-9 and GAD-7, which are instruments that we use, like questionnaires we use to know if women are actually depressed or anxious. And there are some other instruments like to diagnose other mood disorders or traumatic disorders. But interestingly, that low self-esteem, they come in from the lack of social support or the access to resources, which should actually be easy to treat if we allow aid or allow resources to reach that kind of cohort or population of women during their maternal health. Complicated grief. It's really sad when I hear some of the mainstream media saying women and children, women and children. Women, when I used to kind of like as part of a group online to help some women and give some consultation online digitally through digital platforms, they ask me, they're like, why do they say women and children only? I'm not okay with my husband being killed. I'm not okay with my son being killed. Do men life actually matter? And it's really sad that we have to dissect people by gender and race construct. Black lives matter, men lives matter, children's matter. Like all life matters to us when we read things by the creator. However, it seems because we are talking to power seekers and they are the ones who seem to be dominating the story and the narrative, we're trying to preach to those people and we find ourselves bearing a huge labor saying, don't you think that we're human enough? Don't you think our men are human enough to preserve their life? Don't you think our children are human enough? So that's a huge emotional labor for people to share via streamed media, whether it's alienated or marginalized or kind of de-escalated on the platforms that are used like social media, or even the news now that we have something like Zeteo, or you know, like some voices that are like Al Jazeera, Qatar, some of these, you know, like platforms that allow themselves to have at least a bilateral perspective presented. So the complicated grief is serious. I don't know if you guys have seen some of these videos, but it struck me to see that man holding a piece of stone in the rubble and remembering his wife, and he's saying, whom do I get to hug now? It's very painful, subhanAllah. And look at these women not able to speak anything. She waited 9 months to see that baby, and then they're wrapping that baby in a white coffin, and she looks at the baby and she has no words. That grief carries on because they didn't only bury their babies in the process of continuous trauma. They buried their mothers, their aunts, their sisters. They lost their social support piece by piece. Who's going to carry the baby for her to have a sleep at night? Who's going to help her stand up? And some of these women were asked to get displaced again or move to a safer place just minutes after they had delivered a baby. So it's a significant grief, grieving, losing the ancestral knowledge, the wisdom. My mom, my grandmother, my aunt, the people who could have taught me something, who could have helped me with something, since other resources are limited. So that complicated grief is carried on during the maternal period of time, totally differently if you were not to be pregnant or postpartum. Emotionally immature parenting, and from that specific disease, my beloved community, comes in generational trauma, significant. Those people, if they survive, it is significant for them to be able to parent. It's like their emotional and mental state is stunned at the moment of grief and the moment of loss. So they lose the ability to grow up into adults and be able to provide for their children. And that's how the generational trauma goes on. Those survivors of the Holocaust, for instance, a lot of people in Jewish community, they relate to that because they have struggled a lot through their parents trying to survive the Holocaust trauma. And this is a Holocaust of the Palestinians. It's a significant trauma that probably would hold people from growing up. So these are few of the maternal mental health disorders that we're going to have to learn about as a community. Educate ourselves as community peers, as community health workers. We really need to have some toolkits. And if you are a Muslim man, you have really a nice toolkit just in that affinity group of yours that I hope that you will pick up by the time we kind of conclude this learning circle, inshallah. The next slide, my dear. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ما أصاب من مصيبة في الأرض ولا في أنفسكم إلا في كتاب من قبل أن نبرأها إن ذلك على الله يسير لكي لا تأسوا على ما فاتكم ولا تفرحوا بما آتاكم والله لا يحب كل مختال فخور. These two verses, my dear community, is in Surah Al-Hadid. Surah Al-Hadid is a very important surah. I want you guys to try to kind of reflect on it. For those who have not read the Quran, this is a chapter called Surah Al-Hadid, kind of the iron, the literal definition for it. And it says, you know, like without jumping into the literal translation here, every trial we go through is part of the dichotomy that we live in. It's pain and pleasure. None of them is permanent. Both of them are temporary. And what we may think is now pleasurable, like our privilege, is a huge burden now on our shoulder, because what are we capable of doing with it to serve those who are actually in pain, in agony that is excruciating and it's explicit in our face? What can we do? Surah Al-Hadid, or the iron concept, has actually been a huge transformation of civilization when it appeared. That is why it has a chapter by its name, which kind of marks the revolution, the industrial revolution. We moved in from using fire as a resource to iron into industries, and kind of grew as civilizations afterwards. So when we think about civilization and capitalism and power seeking, it's very important that Allah reminds us in these two verses that trials are calculated. And oftentimes when we look at them in the past, like if we read now trials, despite the fact that they seem to be ages and centuries for those, the victory and the conclusion afterwards always, subhanAllah, al-batil, or falsehood or fallacies, are short-lived. And those who stand on the right side of history, on the righteous side of the story, they always, subhanAllah, end up living longer, and their legacy lives longer, and the lessons they teach people lives longer. So not to get too excited about our privilege or our the presence of tools that we have now, we have also to remember that things change and our reality will shift, and the truth and truth seeking is what would actually bring us to implement equity and achieve some sort of internal peace, even if external peace doesn't seem to be implemented or achievable. So always remember, those who are capable of having an internet connection and able to listen to this circle, this pleasure and privilege that we're in, it's not permanent. I will never forget where I came from. I will never forget the times that I had to flee certain wars myself, and how my parents fled certain wars themselves, and how I immigrated to be able to seek more knowledge and do more of a cultural exchange, and realize how big are my shortcomings as an individual by not reaching out and speaking out my truth and speaking up for those who are oppressed, regardless if I sit in an area where people may feel uncomfortable or perceive the speaking of the truth as inconvenient to their comfort zone. Next, please. And the reason I brought this reminder is that what's happening here, what's happening there in the Gaza Strip, what's happening to Palestinians, it's actually happening here. And that's why I brought in the national numbers. We're not doing any better. Anytime we actually try to hoard resources or live our lives as consumers and capitalists, we're going to experience the same war, but it's internal one. It seems to me sometimes, like when I hear from parents, all parents, by the way, of all faith backgrounds, they always ask me about schooling, especially moms, about schooling, about feeding, about healthy diet. We feel like we send our kids every day as Ummi Musa, the mother of Musa. We throw them in the river of this life, worried so much until they come back to us. Our hearts are empty. Our fears are growing. So if we let go of this oppression happening in other areas of the globe, we're actually living some of its manifestations here. That is why I strongly believe nobody is free until everybody is free, right? So there is survivor guilt in the Palestinian lands, because there's still like the West Bank and other areas of Palestine, whether they're actually Jewish or identify as, you know, occupied territory citizens or Israeli citizens. Everybody in the globe now is kind of living the concept of survivor's guilt. I get that question from all spectrum of my patients, by the way, no exceptions, I would have to say. The moral injury concept as well, it's consistently coming in, especially from people who carry like a little bit heavier weight in their titles, whether they are teachers, doctors, lawyers. The more privilege you believe you are carrying in your shoulder, the more burdening they become. And the concept of moral injury, which is like the reality doesn't seem to align with my moral value. Survivor's guilt mean I feel like I shouldn't have survived, I should have been in their place, or the continuous trauma being exposed to these videos. And that is why I put these two ayahs or two verses of Surah Al-Hadid. This is a fallacy, my dear community. The fact that we think that we are survivors is a reality that needs to be reconsidered. We are actually like pretty much as enslaved as any other places. We just don't recognize it. The only difference is that Palestinians said no more checkpoints for us, no more gatekeeping, no more holding air and electricity and resources, no more grabbing our resources, no more erasing our history and our culture. And with their call of liberation comes our wake-up call to understand that what we are living nowadays is like a hamster in a wheel. We're running a pace of life that is not sustainable. We haven't even yet grieved the pandemic or the COVID-19 matters or issues. Yet we're running back into work, 8 to 5. We're running back into school system. We didn't really learn much from what has happened during the pandemic. It was a global injury. Yet there are people who are not, we think they're not representative. And I believe if you believe that current people in power are not representative, then for God's sake, do something about it. For your mental wellness, do something about it. Let's hold our wounds so they don't scar us, and try to use the right treatment for it and pick up the right kit and stop band-aiding the process. In order for us to understand the moral injury, first of all, did we hold to the moral compass? Did we really hold our lifestyle on a daily basis to the true moral compass? Are we accepting the reality for as is while committing to truth seeking and truth implementing on a daily basis, which is a very important piece of therapy or treatment when we talk about such global causes like in Palestine? It's called acceptance and commitment therapy, which Palestinians in Gaza are mastering, mashallah. I have to say that as someone who looks at it from a healthcare perspective, those people are teaching everything in the book, word by word. SubhanAllah, they're accepting the reality, but they're committing to their truth. Death is not the season finale. It's not the death. It's not the end of this life. Death is definitely like something that we face on a daily basis, but we still love life and we will prove it. Nobody will hold our voices anymore. We will speak up. We will be vocal. And you see these things. So I ask you, while you're accepting the ugly reality of being passive participants in this war, especially women, and I will talk to women more as we move through these slides, inshallah, and I hope that the time is continuing to serve us, alhamdulillah. I really encourage you to ask yourself, how much do I serve capitalism, consumerism, and supremacy in my life? Do you think a race is better than race? Do you think white is better than black? Do you think that beauty standards should be held within one unilateral perspective? Do you think that you should have more in your house, better curtains, better sofas, more food, really occupied by mundane, temporary measures of beauty or success? If so, let's recommit back to the truth and identify with our moral compass. Because if we are holding to our values, nobody can wound those enough to make us lose them. And the morbidity of these as moral injury or survivor guilt, which will come to the next slide, please, is to understand that they leave us in a space of being traumatized. Like, I really can't comprehend this. I can't fathom this. How can I do this? And then it goes from an individual level to settings. I see this on groups. I see this in workshops. I see this in classes. I see this in communities. So this is an action item for all, right? If you are a teacher in a school, Islamic school, a public school, a teacher in Sunday school and Saturday school, I have a small request from you. Consider reading about trauma-informed approach. Ask yourself, am I providing safe space to the people around me? Am I actually respecting everyone in my circle? If you are a spouse, if you are a mom, if you are a doctor, if you are a director, if you're a boss, am I actually trusting and verifying, providing people with trust and verifying as I go, and reminding people that I respect you, you're safe around me, I trust you, show me your choices. Re-guide people to righteous choices or right choices, depending on your scale. As a Muslim, I identify with righteous and falsehood more than right and wrong per se. Empowerment. Remind people that they have the capacity to do stuff. There are wonderful studies that are done by Muslim scholars, like Professor Ranad Dajani, for instance. She's done some studies on Syrian refugees in some camps, and she found that when they actually empower some of these youth, like between 16 and 18, and give them a career, like learn how to do haircuts or learn how to do sewing, they found that monoamine, like an enzyme in the brain that causes depression, is actually inhibited and decreasing after they have learned a profession of their own. So empower your community. If you are a principal in a school, how do you treat your students? Do you tell them that you confide in them, that you trust them, that you respect them? They're amazing, they're great. A common problem I hear amongst, especially Muslim communities, and even like women specifically, since we're talking about maternal health, there's not much of a collaboration. Women, I would like to remind myself and everybody else, we are probably the first oppressed group, right? In the story of Genesis, people continue to adopt the falsified story that Eve or Hawa or Adam's spouse was the one who pushed him to do the mistake. So for me, women are the first group to be oppressed in humanity. So we do have the oppressed mentality. We have to remind ourselves that we are liberated by our Creator. He holds us an equitable place to the man. We're not any less. We're not a second degree. Even more, he compares women and men like night and day. You can't say one is better than the other. And that's one of my favorite surahs in Surah Al-Layl. وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَى وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا تَجَلَّى وَمَا خَلَقَ الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنثَى. So the day and night in two separate ayahs, but the male and female, the man and woman, are in one ayah. The difference between us, or the favoritism between us, is actually like in day and night. You can't say one is better than the other. So it's very important to collaborate, leverage, amplify the voices like Maristan, for instance. Really bring that NGO or non-for-profit organization that would donate to Maristan, attend their circles, amplify their work. The same thing for other non-for-profit organizations that you know of. Collaborate. This is a trauma-informed approach. If you are part of a mosque, if you're part of a church, if you're part of a hospital, consider learning about trauma-informed approach, whether it's to healing, as healthcare sector, as education, as in any sector. To the next slide, please. Now, coping and support mechanisms. I kind of mentioned to you guys very important piece. I kind of noted to you that the moral injury, the survivor's guilt, the continuous trauma that we may experience as we think of ourselves as second degree or second-hand experience with the trauma, though I really think that in the United States, we're experiencing much worse, whether it's the police brutality, the racism, our Black brothers and sisters who go through this since the 30s, and it's not even done. The racism really touched them deeply to the root in the system structurally, and now we see that manifesting at Palestinians as well. What I recommend you guys do not do is cynicism. I will start with that. Cynicism means like, do I really matter? Does my work matter? I mean, people have done this Arab Spring before, or like there has been a revolution here and there. So-and-so movement has done that, and look where we are. Of course, we're going to live this recurrent theme because we are reactive rather than proactive. We're not really repairing the wounds, the scars that we've carried from the emotional trauma, especially in the United States. We're talking about a country that has lived 230 years of its 250 years age in wars. We didn't take time as people living in America, or actually Americans who consider themselves Americans rooted in here, we didn't take time to heal. So obviously we reflex, like you slap me on the face, I'll punch you in the gut. Like build the wall, kill them all. Our reaction is very dramatic, and we are overreactive and very aggressive. And believe it or not, if you're a part of the system, if you are a consumer in the system, where it's mainstream or public education, you may have inherited what we call internalized oppression. You think less of yourself as a person who is a people pleaser, or a community servant, or someone in a space where you like to serve rather than seek power or hoard resources. You probably have heard yourself say, well, I'm not really worthy. And here I need to remind you of a very important person, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. For those who know the Islamic history, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was the first governor after the Prophet has actually left us and the revelation was over. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is one that you can really count all what he has said through his lifetime in 4 pages, literally. But one important word he said after the Prophet ﷺ has passed away, he said, أَيَنْقُصُ الدِّينُ وَأَنَا حَيٌّ. When you know, like people started to think, you know what, we can just ignore one pillar, which is the zakah, which is a very important pillar in the Muslim nation in order to establish an equitable economy and make sure that everybody flourish and prosper, not only the 1% who has the wealth. He said, أَيَنْقُصُ الدِّينُ وَأَنَا حَيٌّ. Could this lifestyle that is meant to establish equity and it's purposeful to make sure that everybody lives in this earth with dignity and integrity, it becomes any less of that? No. And that is what I want to remind you. Memorize that statement. You are very important. Your voice, your work, your decisions to make a lifestyle change, especially as a woman. If you are in the maternity period, in the productive phase, if you are to become a mom anytime soon, if you are a mother now, what you do will establish the ummah, right? You are an you are an ummah, right? You are a nation within your sphere. What you do in your circle really does have the ripples effect. As a zulmu zulumat, the oppression is actually circles of darkness. The same thing, an the mother, maternal period of time, is actually circles of mercy and empathy. And it's the circles that establish to the ummah, right? So forget about that cynicism. Think of yourself as very important and as your voice is very crucial. Something called transference and countertransference. So when I sit with someone or like I watch a video, I think to myself, oh my gosh, I can't imagine this is my baby. This could be my baby. That transference is a double-edged sword. Transference meaning I am projecting my feelings on the person that I'm talking with, or like throwing my emotions and notions at them. And counter-transference, I'm actually absorbing their emotions and their notions into me. This is a very dangerous interaction between people. And from a mental health standpoint, even for a human encounter to be safe, it's very important for us to step back and step up. Meaning, I step back and ask myself, is this really a feeling that I own? Is this an idea that I actually have validated and filtered through? Is this really my idea? Is this really my feeling? And once you step back and recognize that this is something that is happening to you, step above that and step up for yourself. Face that fear and that adversity and grow resilience in yourself. So it's very important to recognize transference or counter-transference when they happen. Butler syndrome, I hear this at the higher level as well. It's a very concept for the oppressed mentality, meaning in the past, especially during the enslavement of the white race to our Black brothers and sisters, those who had fairer skin, they would work as butler in the white master's house. And the butler would see the white master and would think to themselves, oh, he's strong, he has power, I want to act like him so I can be like him or like her. So they start actually passing their aggression on their Black brothers and sisters. I highly encourage you to search deep for that internalized oppression in you, because that syndrome is very, very painful and agonizing. I hear it in the form of like, you know, like they probably brought it on themselves, or they shouldn't have actually, they should have left, or they shouldn't have put their kids through this. You are not in that context. You have not experienced 100 years of discrimination. And I can assure you, most likely they didn't make that informed choice or consensual choice of that kind of hardship life. So I highly encourage you to ask yourself, if you have that voice inside of you, you might be actually experiencing that syndrome, which is a specific form of internalized racial oppression. Like you think of yourself less and you oppress yourself. No, liberate yourself from all forms of enslavement. Do not think of yourself any less than any other mother who is worthy of access to health, access to safety, integrity in life, dignity in life and in death. Look at them. We're actually looking at them gathering their kids in pieces, right? That is not acceptable by any means, shape, and form. You did already your first task today, mashallah. You've learned about the Palestinian cause. You've learned some concepts. So on your checklist, there's a to-do, which is not showing up on this slide, but I will share the link with Sister Tasmir and the Maristan. You're more than welcome. No copyrights of anything that I have shared today. Share it, use it however you want to. You can remove my name, just use it and share it with the whole community. But this to-do list is something that I use like on my home screen, or you can print it. You will get the link, you can edit it. This is a very simple to-do list to do on a daily basis to support the Palestinian mother on a regular basis. So listen to their voices and amplify them. Don't speak on their behalf. Let them speak on their behalf. The mainstream media is shutting them down, is de-escalating them on the algorithm. They're using the artificial intelligence and the human intelligence, if the human is actually applicable in that part, but they're using every tool potentially possible, every oppressive tool to suppress the voice of a Palestinian mother, of the Palestinian community member. Be a better caregiver yourself. As I said, honestly, the darkness or the dhulumat is circles, and it has the same ripples effect as equity and justice. If you are, as a mom, harnessed or hoarded some of that trauma from previous encounters or history, or even carried it on the genetic code of yours, really learn how to be a better caregiver. Seek help. Seek help like in Maristan, Khalil Center, in your mental health professionals. Talk to someone. Make sure that you heal your wounds so you can raise confident, mentally well offspring and generations, so they can do what our young youth now are doing. Speak up for the truth. Speak up your truth. Civic engagement is very important. It can be as simple as donating to Maristan, donating to NGOs, supporting non-for-profit work, be a leader in your community, be present in an encampment, even explore a rule that needs to be broken, because as you can see, more man-made laws now are coming to suppress our voices. So be an advocate for a law that helps liberate other souls and liberate yourself as well. Other things that you can actually do is radical empathy. I always want to remind people of something that is very important, besides empowering, which is part of the 6 pieces of trauma-informed approach, is remember that the one command in Surah Al-Rahman, the most merciful, وَأَقِيمُوا الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ وَلَا تُخْسِرُوا الْمِيزَانَ. And most importantly, remember that we were made to be a nation of the middle, a nation of moderation, ummatan wasata. This current global atmosphere is polarizing and radicalizing, and really being grounded in faith helps us significantly run a moderate approach to this atrocious genocide that we see our sisters and brothers and children facing on a daily basis in multiple areas in the globe, specifically the Palestinian cause. So I highly recommend you to ground yourself in faith. Remember that qist is equity, is not really the full justice. Justice will only implemented on the day of judgment. Equity is the one that is explicit and can be implemented in this day and time and in every time. So أمة القسط أقيموا القسط and be أمة وسطة. القسط والوسط, equity and moderation. Don't let this situation radicalize you under any circumstances. All lives actually matter, and this is the dawah, and this is the concept that you get founded and grounded in. And Palestinian mothers would really appreciate it if you speak up for them, if you make dua for them, if you become a better mother yourself, if you learn from them and teach about them. These are the few tools that I would actually recommend that you guys use them. And I'm sorry that the slide is not showing the to-do list, but it should be easy for you guys to, inshallah, open it and utilize at your own, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. And I look forward to hearing and learning from your questions, comments, and concerns. Jazakumullahu khairan.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Al Sad. I know I definitely learned a lot from you and have a lot that I will be reflecting on after this. And, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us. We have quite a few questions here, and so I'll just start going down our Q&A list. So the first question, someone had asked about the concept of rahma and its connection to the importance of mental health.
So the concept of rahma came when I talked about maternity. So maternal comes from the belonging to a motherhood or mother characteristics. And we consider a rahim, which is the uterus or the womb, however, like your culture refers to it. Ar-rahim or the womb is connected to the rahma. So in Arabic, the root for both of them is rahima, which is bestowed mercy or shared mercy. And one of the characteristics of the names of God or Allah is the most merciful, Ar-Rahman. And Ar-Rahman has taught us that Ar-Rahim, the womb, Mu'allaqa, is connected to the throne of the creator of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's very important when we talk about women's health, about maternal health, to remember that it's really a divine concept. Ar-Rahim also is another word for kinship, right? Our relatives and how we take care of each other as related in blood or related as a community. And for those who do not know, at Hujjat al-Wada' or Khutbat al-Wada', the sermon, the last sermon of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he actually established two important pillars of a civilization to thrive. He said our prayer and how we take care of women. So استوصوا بالنساء خيرا. Take care of your prayers, pray on time, and make sure that you connect, that connection between you and Allah will ground you. And then take care of women. So civilization who do not take care of women are not considered to fulfill the civil code from an Islamic perspective. So if you want to know that this is a civilized community, look at women's health, look at how they treated the women, at least from an Islamic perspective. So I hope that I answered that question, inshallah.
So the next question is asking, if we're speaking up, if we're boycotting, if we're involved in various social justice acts, does that make up for the fact that our tax money is funding these massacres?
That's a beautiful question. So I'm gonna answer it from both like the healthcare industry perspective. The healthcare oath, which has not changed for over centuries now, is do no harm, right? We made an oath in the healthcare industry to do no harm. So I highly recommend people to consider what we call the concept of tax resistance, war tax resistance. Resist paying your taxes into the war, either by looking into where your taxes are going. And just to be clear, Maristan or NGOs are not responsible for my suggestion. Also look into the concept of not paying taxes and shifting that into non-for-profit organization. And there's a way for that, and I can happily share resources. And from a fiqh standpoint, interestingly, fuqaha or scholars have said, لا ينتقل الحرام إلى ذمتين, meaning the haram does not necessarily move from dhimma to dhimma, meaning I pay the taxes because this is the civil obligation as a citizen in this country. And those who manage the taxes are the ones who are burdening the how they spend it. However, the concept that counteracts that is the انصر أخاك ظالما أو مظلوما, meaning endorse your brother if they were oppressed or if they are oppressors. And when the Prophet ﷺ was asked to elaborate on that, they said, we understand how to endorse the oppressed, but how to endorse the oppressor is to hold them back from practicing their oppression. So our citizenship and our civil obligation, as it is to pay taxes, also to know or to have a say in where our taxes are going. So like, as we know that, for instance, the moment that I pay my taxes, it's not necessarily haram because I'm not the one spending them, but I'm also like, there's another aspect. That's why, subhanAllah, we are people of the context as Muslims rather than people of the text. Actually, the problem that we're in now is that there are people who have went on literal and textual understanding of their scripture. We don't go as people of the text. In this context, we have the duty and the obligation to stop our taxes from going where they're going nowadays, especially that almost 60% of our taxes in the United States are paid into warfare and ammunitions. And that is not okay when $14 billion are paid for wars every year, or to support like the concept of the promised land. And there's a need for that only in the maternal health, mental health needs, right? So no, you give me that $14 billion because as a healthcare provider, I made an oath not to do harm, and I don't want you to use my money in that. So you can actually use multiple resources in order to kind of implement your Muslim identity or even American privilege into that, inshallah. I hope that I answered the question.
Okay, so we'll do one more question, just to our restriction on time. So this person's asking, what are some misconceptions and stigmas you've witnessed surrounding therapy and mental health within the scope of the ongoing genocide?
Well, interestingly, as I said, I do get patients from all. I wouldn't say, I don't know like what the stigma means. Again, I remind myself and people, what do you mean by the word by stigma? If you mean by stigma meaning it's not normalized, I would ask you what is normal, right? There are a lot of actually research in the literature. By a lot, I mean some. There's not much research done on mental health in general, because I don't think that we all agree on the definition by the secular sect. Because let me say it loud and clear, there's no holistic without holy in it. So if we continue to run psychological treatment or mental health from a secular perspective, we're not going to really get to the depth of the psyche in general, right? So I don't think that there's an actual stigma. I don't think that there is representation or clear understanding of mental health is. But I can tell you, for instance, that a lot of people in the Muslim community, it's not like that they are not willing to seek mental health. There a couple of studies, one of them is actually by Dr. Rani Awad, is the religiosity or the background or the cultural background explains only up to 23% of people not seeking help in mental health. So if I want to use objective data, we don't really understand if there's stigmatization. But if you're asking about my experience as a provider, most of the time it's access and representation. People cannot get in a timely fashion, which is reflected in the data that I shared. Most importantly, people don't find representation. And it might be surprising to you, but a lot of my Jewish patients felt safer coming to me because they were not sure if they go to someone else who may not identify with the Palestinian cause. That's according to their perception, of course. They may be alienated or marginalized because they're Jewish, right? So I have a lot of these patients coming in to me and say, like, the war in Gaza is really impacting my mental health. How can you help me? Right? So the representation is not only for Muslims, now for the specific to the Palestinian cause, who actually identifies with the Palestinian cause, and also people who see themselves on the other side of the story are now searching to see who would actually endorse their understanding or their perspective. So again, we're going into the polarization. So I'm not really sure how to identify or define stigma, but I probably would recommend this for Maristan to delve deeper on what people mean when they say stigmatization of health, because I don't use the word normal. I'm not a big fan of the word normal. I don't know what normal is. We're taught to diagnose the abnormal, but I don't know what normal is nowadays. And I hope that I was able to steer thoughts into your question rather than give you a ready-made palatable answer. So I just want you to think more into your question and focus it, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Al Sad. Thank you so much for, sharing your knowledge with us, for taking the time to answer these questions. We really appreciate you taking out the time from what I'm sure is a very busy evening. And yeah, I hope that everyone that joined us today was able to benefit. And please, please, please remember Maristan in your du'as. And most of all, please, please remember Dr. Al Sad in your du'as for this amazing learning circle that she's helped us facilitate. Really quickly before we end off, there were some links that I posted in the chat. One of them was a link for resources for therapy, and another was a link to book an appointment at our clinic. If you find that, you're struggling maybe with some of the things that Dr. Al Sad mentioned in our talk, please feel free to reach out to a therapist. I also posted a link to our donation page. As you know, our learning circles and healing circles are free of cost, and currently are run on donations of supporters like yourself. And so any small amount is appreciated. And also, we have this Palestine guidebook that we have compiled at Maristan, and you can find the link on our website for this as well. And then here we just have the same links that I just mentioned to you for booking appointments at our clinic, and then for supporting our programs. We really appreciate you all coming out, and we hope to see you at our next learning or healing circle, inshallah.
Tasmir, if I may just say, I shared a link in the chat,
Mm-hmm.
and this link is a Canva to-do list. Please feel free to open it. Oh, let me actually correct the link here for you guys. Bismillah ar-Rahman.
Yeah, I think it says we have to request access.
Yeah, let me make sure that it's shared. The sharing will allow everybody with the link. My apologies. Artificial intelligence will never surpass a human's. So, وإياكم إن شاء الله جميعا. So please feel free, for the sister who asked or the brother who asked, how can I know, is it okay to feel guilty that I'm not doing enough? And nafs al-lawama is a good sign. We are all feeling guilty, not only for not doing enough for the Palestinian cause, not doing enough for our own truth, for our purpose in life. So inshallah, hopefully that this feeling of not doing enough will motivate you to do more. So shift your mind, accept the fact that we will never do enough, and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our gate to Jannah, and that's the only gate. So please make sure that you do more and commit to more, and hopefully that this very simple tool can help you guys, and hopefully that Maristan can use that as well. And Jazakallah khair, Tasmir, and everybody who has really taken up away from your time. I want to say something about the concept of taken out of my busy time. I don't give to the community out of my free time. The Muslim community specifically, and the community in general, is too precious to me that I cannot put a price tag of being with you and spending this time with you, inshallah. And as you may see in the nafs definition or ingredients, the time, if we are too busy to heal together and circle together, what are we using our time in? So alhamdulillah that he recruited me to be of service in this few minutes with you guys. And thank you so much for being patient with this content. And please, if you have anything that you can teach me, share accordingly. And inshallah, hopefully in the follow-up debriefing email, I can share some contact information, so people who have questions or comments or like invitation for me to learn more, that I can learn from you, as you have humbled me with being present as learners. And I'm sure that a lot of you can teach me a lot. So jazakumullahu khairan. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. And inshallah, we'll see you at our next Learning and Healing Circle. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.